Elden Ring. It's one of my favorite games ever. It's FromSoft's largest and most ambitious project, and so much of it is them operating at the top of their game. The world and characters, the exploration and levels, the combat and bosses, the buildcraft and progression. But what if you didn't progress? What if you stayed at level 1 for the entire game? Obviously this is not a new concept. People have been doing this in these games for over a decade. Not me though. Despite being a fan of the series since 2015, I've always stayed away from challenge running. But I don't know, it just felt like time. With Elden Ring being my favorite game in the catalog and having my favorite suite of bosses, it was the easy choice. And by the end I just felt like I had so much to say about them that I needed to make a video. Level 1 is such a unique experience because not only do you need to play way more consistently than normal, you also eventually get these perfect fights where the pace is never broken by taking damage and needing to heal. Now, there's been a lot of videos about Elden Ring's bosses, some of them good analysis and some blatant misinformation, but it's undeniable that they're extremely complex and unforgiving even compared to other FromSoft games. When doing a level 1 run, there's sort of two approaches. The first is to learn each fight so well that you can do it near hitless, and the other is to stack so many buffs that you can borderline script many of them. I chose the former since I already knew most of the bosses really well and wanted to test how good I actually was against them. So I farmed 2 Lordsworn straight swords from the Gatefront ruins and off I went. I thought I'd probably need to experiment with different weapons as the game went on, but man, Square Off is just insane. I ended up using them for the entire playthrough and never felt like they were a bad choice. A few notes about the ranking before I start. First, the list is ordered from least to most fun, and I'm only counting all the remembrances, plus the bosses you have to fight in order to get to them. I did leave out some really minor ones like Ancient Dragon Man though. This came out to 38 total bosses and 1 non-boss sanity test that I included anyway. Second, I didn't record any of my fights from the first 2 regions, so I had to go back to them in New Game Plus for footage. I think that's all though, so I'll get started with the real dregs of the list. Godskin Duo gets last by default because it's the only boss that I was unable to beat without cheese. And I did try, for probably too long, because I had heard all the warnings, but I really thought I could do it since I've never struggled with them. Even on my first playthrough I beat them in just a few attempts, and I'm not saying that to brag since immediately after I got walled by Malekith for 3 hours. I actually enjoy this boss on normal runs. I see a lot of people say that Rune level 1 shows the true quality of a boss, but that isn't really a perspective I agree with. It certainly exposes annoying attacks, but you're also intentionally ignoring a lot of intended game mechanics by playing this way. Both Godskins have low enough health and stance that you can quickly burst them down if you know what you're doing and make some calculated trades. At this point I usually end up with both of them dead at the same time, which is a bit silly but satisfying to see how far I've come. But even when this happens it's always a messy back and forth, and trading is not an option at level 1. There's just too much in this fight that is not reasonable to consistently avoid. The infamous roll, noble presence, the Apostle's frame trap double swipe, both the Godskins attacking through each other. All of these things are theoretically avoidable if you're an absolute dodge god, but I am definitely not at that level. So sleep pots it was. Thankfully the DLC makes this even easier since the resources are infinite and eternal sleep lets you just wail on them for ages before they wake up. But even with sleep pots this was a stressful affair, since landing them can be a pain, and the farming route is pretty slow with you having to ride all over the Cerulean coast. If you do a level 1 run, yeah, just cheese this fight. Contrary to what some people think, we don't play these games to punish ourselves, and this really isn't worth the pain. Jory, oh god, what an absolute nightmare. I was determined to do this without backstab looping him, both because I knew that I could, and because he's got the most infuriatingly tiny back hitbox ever. Usually when FromSoft makes this kind of gimmick boss, they end up feeling like laughably easy afterthoughts, but they really went the opposite direction with this one. This fight is just so ridiculously overtuned, and I know people like to call any boss that has combos overtuned, but I really can't think of any other word here. The tracking on his golden arcs is so extreme that if you aren't behind cover you need to dead sprint perpendicular to them, and pray nothing gets in your way, or that a summon isn't also casting them from a slightly different angle that kills you. The summons in general are such an overwhelming onslaught. There is a method to their madness, in that they spawn in specific formations depending on what Jory is doing, but in this case the method only feels like a first draft. Like, you might avoid the Fat Inquisitor's spin move and run back towards Jory, only for him to immediately just cast the same summons again. He might summon the Jumping Slam Inquisitor off screen, so better hope you have that timing memorized based on a sound cue. And even his melee attacks are no longer safe openings in the second half, because he'll spawn 2 Inquisitors to hit you just after he finishes, basically forcing you into backstabs for the iframes. In my winning run, I just got lucky and he didn't go into phase 2 until around 20% health. This is one boss that I don't think is even fun on normal runs, because there's just too much chaos to have any real consistent strategy. You know, despite every game in this series having a very similar framework, they're all pretty different experiences. Each one has its own strengths and weaknesses. But if there's one constant through all of them, it's that I absolutely cannot stand NPC fights. NPCs just work with an entirely different rule set from normal bosses, and it's not one I enjoy. Elden Ring's NPC fight mechanics admittedly aren't as bad as some of the other games, like Bloodborne's infinite ammo hunters or the annoying 2-hit stun in Dark Souls 3. Here they're very susceptible to walking into your weapon skills or jump attacks, but they seem to have compensated for this by making you fight the most insufferable NPCs they could possibly design. Killing Hornson early and telling Moore to go die at least rids the battle of the 2 most obnoxious ones, but both Leda and Dane can throw out multi-hit instant death attacks so fast that you always need to be playing as safe as possible. Trying to fight more than one at a time is a death sentence, so every attempt once Leda spawns, you just have to sprint in a circle until Ansbach gets there. After you have your summons, it's much more manageable, but still dangerous and just not enjoyable in any way. The other frustrating part is the reset time, as you have to wait through 2 loading screens, Leda's speech, and the time it takes for Dane to spawn in. As much as I love this game, From's insistence on locking the final bosses of both the base game and DLC behind miserable NPC fights is an eternal source of pain for me. And another one. Fia's Champions is basically the exact same thing, except much easier and with much less health. I didn't record this fight and I did not want to refight the gargoyles to get back here, so please enjoy this dramatic recreation of what the fight is like. Endlessly sprinting around in a circle. The first 2 rounds are pretty much free, but the third one is again just multiple aggressive enemies in a big flat open arena. To win, you sprint away from them and wait for the tiny openings when they're separated and there's no skulls chasing you. Thankfully, even though there's 3, they are individually much less threatening and tanky than Leda and Dane, so this really isn't all that hard, just unbelievably boring. This is not a mandatory boss, but for some bizarre reason I just felt the need to fight it. The Golden Hippo is basically a fight against 2 things, the camera and RNG. Phase 1 is pretty fine as long as you don't get shoved up against a wall with the camera stuck in the boss's mouth. Also, not sure if people know this, but the grab can be easily avoided by sprinting and jumping to the side. It's much more forgiving than trying to roll it. But of course, the fight where I won was the one time he didn't use it, so you'll just have to trust me. I just don't understand why there isn't a lock-on point for his head. It would be so much easier to see what was happening and would solve a lot of the problems here. Definitely not all of them though, because the real pain comes from the phase 2 quill attacks. These moves can pretty much just decide to hit you if they really want to. Spamming light roll seemed to avoid the quill rain most of the time, and the spin can be pretty reliably avoided with a dodge to the right if you aren't too close, but you're still really just hoping for the best here. You definitely do not want to do this fight if a quill one-shots you. I also love that as soon as phase 2 starts, the Hippo seems to get really excited about his new moves, and use all of them in a row with no opportunities to do damage. Captured this clip of him using all 4 new attacks in a row in my winning run. A solid 20 seconds of no openings, very fun stuff. Metyr is honestly pretty similar to the Hippo. Both have a functional first phase and an extremely painful second. In Metyr's case, the first phase is actually pretty fun once you get a handle on it. Her combos have a good rhythm with pretty generous openings, and some of her attacks, like the double hand slam and jumping squirt, force pretty tight directional rolling. The problem though is that phase 2 is even worse than the Hippo's. Every new move she gains ranges from a tedious time waster like the minefield and spawning enemies, to basically broken. I don't know if I really have anything to add regarding the laser, it just sucks. And even when using Raptor of the Mist, you still have to worry about the too fast to escape AoE drastically reducing your openings until she uses it. The spin is avoidable, but god, I just cannot stand this move. I am so unable to time the close range dodge, and running away from it places you behind her, which is really not where you want to be. And I think that's what's most frustrating about Meteor. More so than any other boss, it just feels like things aren't working as intended. Like, the intention of the laser move seems to be that you run out of range with the first pass and then back in for the second, but it's just too fast or too large for you to reasonably do this. So you just end up eating shit or using an ash and then standing around at close range for ages while you wait for the attack to end. The spin always ending with the boss turned 180 degrees makes it seem like you're supposed to dodge through it and end up facing each other. But if you want to actually avoid damage, you'll either end up behind her or super far away. And even with 60 vigor, I've had these attacks randomly one-shot me. Just nothing makes sense here, and of all the remembrances, this is the only one I would absolutely skip if I did another level 1 run. We're starting to get out of the truly painful territory, but Fire Giant really teetered on that line. This is another fight that I don't mind on normal runs, because it's always just a minor speed bump with some great spectacle, an insane cutscene, and an engaging enough moveset. I've never really understood the people who passionately hate him, but I'll admit Rune level 1 did give me a bit of insight. The problem with Fire Giant, outside of his blatantly broken fire breath, is that you're really at the mercy of his RNG for getting actual openings. Phase 1 is not an issue, as most of the time you're pretty much free to just beat his feet with little opposition, but it does become a real slog if you die a bunch in Phase 2, since there's nothing interesting going on here mechanically. And you probably will be repeating it because Phase 2 can be a real pain. It's kind of a trend with a lot of Elden Ring's larger bosses, that they'll have some attacks that are super easy and just let you freely wail on them, and other attacks that are extremely difficult and offer no openings at all. For this fight, it manifests in his laughably easy melee slams and his brutally punishing fire moves. Even the fire moves that aren't broken are still really dangerous and often require you to sacrifice dealing damage. Like when he brings the 2 orbs out, you need to immediately focus on popping them so that you don't end up with some overlapping unavoidable nightmare. I'm actually glad I happened to get some insanely bad RNG for my winning run. He would just not stop rolling around and blasting me with fireballs. The last 20% of his health bar took literally half the duration of the fight. This happened though, which kinda made up for it. As much as it pains me to put this insufferable spammy prick this high, I have to admit that Gideon was less painful than I thought he would be. It's funny that he has a reputation of being such a pushover, because as someone who doesn't try to max out his damage, he often kills me more than all the real endgame bosses. I think using a fast weapon helped a lot here, because as long as you don't run out of stamina, it's very easy to just stagger him out of every spell with a quick jump attack. I'm pretty sure Scarlet Aeonia is the only one with hyper armor, and that move is not threatening at all. Jory has also kind of replaced him as the new bullet hell nightmare of the game, so going back to Gideon feels almost quaint. People always complain about the golden discs, but I think if you kill all the demigods first, the new spells he gains replace this one. Ever since I started fighting Moog and Melania before the Ashen Capital, I've literally never seen this attack, so honestly that's my number 1 piece of advice for this guy. Oh boy, Consort Radahn. I can't get a read on what the general consensus on this fight is these days. Seems like it's still divisive, but starting to swing more positive. Personally though, I've always found him very disappointing, and while the fight can be okay on normal playthroughs, it was an absolute chore at level 1. Consort Radahn has gotten a lot of hate for his extreme difficulty and unintuitive design, and while it was for sure a very painful learning experience on my first playthrough, that isn't ultimately what I care about. What matters to me is, does the difficulty lead to an interesting fight once you have learned to overcome it? And for me, the answer in this case is a firm no. Radahn is just so unbearably tedious and repetitive. He has some of the lowest attack variety of any remembrance, with very few branching combos or positioning-based mix-ups. Since he's so rigid and has almost no mid-combo openings, there's little room for skill expression. The lasers in Phase 2 make it so that the best response for every single melee attack he does is just to roll in a circle around him, and since he rarely moves around the arena or forces you to reposition, that really is 90% of the fight. Radahn captures almost nothing of what makes Elden Ring's bosses so endlessly fun to me, which is that even once you have all of their moves burned into your brain, they still feel so flexible and dynamic. The clone moves in Phase 2 do help a bit, but since they aren't really that common, and don't mix into his normal moveset in a natural way, I don't think they make the fight feel materially different. None of this is to say it's easy though, because it certainly is not. He might have taken me the most attempts of any boss. The difficulty here really comes from 4 things, and only one of them actually relates to his moveset. First is the jank, mostly his iframe ignoring juggle move, and his phase 2 meteor slams. For anyone who doesn't know, the first few frames of the second attack here ignore iframes, so if you're too high up on the uneven ground, it will hit you mid-roll. This got me way too many times, but thankfully I learned that a couple rolls backwards puts you out of range entirely. The meteor slams just depend on where you are in the arena. If you're near a wall, you have a good chance of not being able to get far away enough. You can see me almost get screwed here. This was a real clinch moment. The second source of difficulty is the speed of some of his combo starters. A lot of the DLC bosses have these reaction checks, and maybe I'm just getting old, but it isn't something I'm really a fan of. Here though, it's extra bad because of Source 3, Miquella's hair. Anytime you are behind Radahn, the hair obscures his next windup, and since he doesn't have any dedicated responses to your positioning other than occasionally dashing away, he will often just instantly spin around and slice you. It was so hard for me to not get caught by this for 5 straight minutes. And that's the final thing, this fight takes so long. Only 5 bosses in the game took me longer than 4 minutes, with most hovering around the 3-minute mark. Consort Radahn took 5, and when you combine that length with the difficulty and tedious moveset, I just did not have fun with him. There are other things I could complain about, like how some of his moves make him unpunishable for so long that stance breaking becomes RNG, but this has already gone on for too long. He was a bummer way to end the run, and he's the reason I usually do the DLC before the end of the base game, so that I have a more appropriate finale. Thankfully though, that was the last boss of the run that I actively did not enjoy, and we're moving into the inoffensive speed bump section of the list. As time has gone on, I've really come around to Godskin Noble. He gives you generous openings for high aggression if you know how to space, strafe, and jump his attacks, but you still need to watch out for his dangerous rapier combos that can go on for way longer than you expect. Obviously he still retains the cheesy moves that make Godskin duos so painful, but it doesn't really matter here since you can bully him so quickly that he doesn't have a chance to use them. I also just want to show off this time I dodged his full roll while trapped in a corner, not related to this playthrough at all or even this boss, but maybe the most insane thing I've ever pulled off in this game. The Valiant Gargoyles are an absolutely abominable duo boss and one of the most poorly designed fights in the game, so it might seem insane to have them this high. This is another one that varies wildly from my normal rankings, in which it's at the absolute bottom. As a duo, they are so much worse than the Godskins. Even beyond the poison shenanigans, they have such insane range, mobility, and gap closing potential that it's just impossible to keep both of them on screen. You're bound to end up with one zooming in from behind you with some flying slam. But really, all you need to do to get through painlessly is wait until you have a high enough level weapon, play as aggressive as possible, and make it so that the fight isn't a duo at all. This really isn't all that hard even at level 1, considering their moderate scaling, and how long it takes the other gargoyle to walk over. Separately, the things that make this fight so bad as a duo make the gargoyles really fun. Their constant jumping around and heavy attacks make them feel really dangerous, but they'll always rush towards you to offer big openings. I especially like the long axe and twin blade movesets. They just have the most satisfying flow to me, and I always stop to fight the ones on the main path during normal playthroughs. Renala. This is the first of the fights that I had to record in New Game Plus. I'll keep this ranking based on my first playthrough though. The first phase is really just nothing. There's almost no way to die here unless you get exploded by a globe. Phase 2 can go either way, but on New Game you're likely to just steamroller while taking some chip damage, due to her relatively low damage and health. I beat her first try and she barely put up a fight. On New Game Plus though, man, she really trolled me. Not with the troll though, that summon's pretty easy. The real issue is the Bloodhound Knight. This guy broke my understanding of how her summons work. I thought they despawned after a few attacks or a set time, but when I tried to just run from him, he was absolutely not having it. He literally chased me until Renala spawned a dragon and they killed me together. I think FromSoft has always struggled to make caster bosses feel as good as melee ones, and while Renala is far more interesting than something like Crystal Sage, it still feels like there is so much untapped potential in this concept. Just adding more and more varieties of blue projectiles isn't the answer, because a boss that relies on distance and can't do much to combat you at close range is never going to be as engaging. All of the other demigods have movesets that feel appropriate for their power level and skills, and for being the ultimate sorceress, Renala really lacks anything to actually make you feel it. Let's just round out the Raya Lucaria bosses with Red Wolf of Radagon. This is a boss that's hard to rank because it dies so fast, especially if you forget to take off your fully upgraded weapons in New Game Plus like I did in this footage. The Wolf's sword combos are satisfying to dodge and make the fight a lot less annoyingly difficult than the bite-only ones in the overworld. The overlapping Glint Blade and melee attacks can lead to some tricky but still manageable situations. Both Loretta and Rolana expand on this though, with more challenging and interesting melee magic hybrid movesets. I don't really have anything bad to say about the Wolf, but it's firmly in speed bump territory. Even if you really struggle with its speed and mobility, you're bound to get through the fight by just getting easy RNG and out-damaging it. The Regal Ancestor Spirit is a fight that is far more about vibes than a complex, challenging moveset. The moves it does have are solid and beautifully animated, but have pretty low variety. The music and visual design here is phenomenal, and the mystery of what I was unlocking back when I was first lighting all the bonfires was such an immensely memorable experience. I mention this because Rune Level 1 isn't really fair to bosses like this. The fun of a Level 1 playthrough, for me at least, comes from proving your knowledge of a complex boss under the most punishing circumstances possible. Playing perfectly against a boss like Godfrey or Mesmer makes the fight inherently more fun because you get into this focused, unbroken flow state. For a boss as simple as the Ancestor Spirit, it just doesn't feel all that different, and the teleporting and healing get a little more annoying when you have a higher likelihood of dying and having to get back to that point again. This was still an enjoyable fight, but not really any better or worse than it is on a normal playthrough. Placidusax is another spectacle-driven fight, but definitely one that is much more loved by the community. I love the spectacle too, of course. His presentation is incredible, and he has a lot of cool, inspired attacks, but the fight is just a bit dull mechanically for how long it takes. His mobility in Phase 1 is so low that a lot of the battle feels like beating up a large rock. He does have some attacks to combat you being at his sides or behind him, but they aren't that engaging, and it's so easy to just run circles around him. Phase 2 is more dynamic and exciting since the teleporting allows him to more easily turn the tables on you, but the increased focus on spectacle attacks reduces damage opportunities by a lot. It can really drag on, and that's just not something you want at level 1. With enough burst damage, you can trigger multiple of his scripted dive bombs in a row, and there's nothing you can do other than wait for him to finish. This block probably sounds overly negative because it's still a fight I enjoy. Like, there's nothing wrong with his attacks, and avoiding the massive double laser never gets old. But when you die in one hit from every attack, the last thing you want is to feel not engaged. Because when that happens, dying and having to reattempt the fight becomes a chore and not an opportunity for further mastery. I did manage to beat Placidusax on my first attempt, and I was extremely grateful that I didn't have to spend a bunch more time on him. He's a good fight, but one better left for normal runs, where you can just enjoy the presentation without having to worry about executing everything perfectly. Estelle is one of those brute forceable bosses on normal runs. It has quite a few tricky attacks, but since the time between them is so long, you can tank a lot of damage, chug healing, and still end up winning. This type of fight tends to feel distinctly unsatisfying because you can just win without ever learning how the boss works. I remember thinking in my first playthrough that the only way Estelle could actually kill me was if he one-shot me with his grab. Estelle is not the pinnacle of moveset design or anything, but playing at level 1 does force you to actually take its attacks seriously, and it was probably the most fun I've had with the boss. The fight is slow-paced, but you need to react quickly to its attacks as some of them come out surprisingly fast or need to be outranged. It also has a few very dangerous ultimate moves like the Meteor Rain that are super satisfying to successfully avoid. I wish that it actually used the Galaxy Swipe moves more often. It has a few longer combos that you so rarely see since it usually just does one at a time or focuses on bites or AoEs. This one lunge has always annoyed me though, because the armor awkwardly shoves you back behind him after the attack ends. But yeah, unlike the previous two fairly simple fights, this one makes you put in a bit more effort to learn it, and I think that makes it more fun at level 1. Romina is a boss that I've been going back and forth on since the release of the DLC. I just can't ever truly decide how I feel about her. While she doesn't have much in the way of complex patterns, she has very demanding individual attacks that require atypically precise dodges and positioning. Many of her moves attack with both the centipede and her weapon in ways that will frame trap you if you aren't close enough or far away enough. This can be frustratingly tricky at first, but fun once you've learned it, and I would say that the majority of the time, Romina is really fun. The centipede swipes can also be jumped over, which is always a cool way to increase damage opportunities. But I don't know, there's just something uniquely wonky about this fight. Romina can zip around the arena flinging her centipede around, and it isn't always clear to me which parts of her body are actually hitboxes. The massive flailing limbs can clog up the camera, and her torso collision feels like it interferes with the level of precision you need to dodge everything. She has a habit of getting you stuck on her collision and dragging you across the arena, and if she gets too close to a wall, half her body can clip into it in a really immersion-breaking way. This might be a weird comparison, but the way some of her melee attacks carry her around and fly over your head reminds me of Aldrich, except much more demanding. There's also a few obnoxious attacks like her phase transition AoE, and one ultra-fast backward swipe that I don't think I survived a single time. I just feel like most of Elden Ring's Remembrance bosses have a level of polish that Romina lacks, and despite getting this fight down pretty well, it still feels awkward to me. The Shadow Tree Avatar is a boss where my enjoyment is inversely proportional to how long it takes me to beat. I think the reason I feel this way about the Sunflower more so than any other boss is because it has so many scripted moments. Like, in Phase 1 it loves to use a big Thorn AoE and then transition right into an extended version of Land of Shadow. Then in Phase 2 it's guaranteed to use 3 charges at the start. And in Phase 3 it always uses the big AoE at the start and then probably the triple AoE when it's under half health. None of these are bad attacks and they're actually quite fun to dodge, but they do make every fight feel very similar, especially since there are very few other differences between the 3 phases. In this playthrough though, I beat it in just a few tries, so it was pretty fun. The Avatar is a bit like Estelle in that it has very simple patterns but some difficult attacks that require good dodge timing and positioning. I think Light Roll really helps here too. This was my first playthrough using exclusively Light Roll, and it can make a big difference in some fights. In this case, the longer distance on the roll carries you out of range of the Thorn follow-ups and gives you more time to focus on punishes rather than avoiding the AoEs. When it isn't forcing you away with a scripted attack, it leaves its head very vulnerable for you to pile on damage and end each phase quickly. Sometimes in a level 1 run it's just nice to have a boss that doesn't pose you much trouble. Getting stuck on a few bosses in a row can feel like a slog, and this middle section of the DLC, where most fights were really low on the pain scale, was a much needed respite before the agonizing ending. It's difficult to know where to place Godric because the Stormveil fights are pretty much the same at level 1. Like, yeah, your margin for error is a little lower, but he isn't going to be one-shotting you unless you really mess up. And after 3 years, I don't think anyone is struggling with this boss. But while you're not gaining much here, Godric is still Godric, which means it's still a great fight. I wish that there were more bosses like him in Elden Ring's early game. He offers a decent challenge and has some borderline comically trolly delays, but his low complexity and focus on big attacks rather than combo variations keeps him manageable for a new player. He's really the only fight in the entire game that is like this while also having the level of spectacle of the other major story bosses. The first time I saw him chop his arm and then transition directly into the cutscene still screaming was the moment I realized Elden Ring was built different. It was just such a step up in presentation from their previous games. To get to another crazy event battle like this, you have to go all the way to Morgott or Radahn, and both of those fights are way more complex and difficult. It's so important to have early highlights in a game that encourages replayability. Starting a new Elden Ring run can be a bit slow due to all the riding around and collecting things, but the quality of Margit, Stormveil, and Godric greatly reduces this barrier to entry. Speaking of Margit, he is even more similar to a normal run. It's kinda funny to look back to launch when we all got absolutely roasted by this fight, because now I can easily beat it at level 1 without dying. It makes sense though, because while Godric is appropriately simple, Margit is inappropriately complex. Seriously, of all the major bosses in this game, he was one of the hardest for me to master. He has way more quick dagger follow-ups than Morgott and some pretty nasty frame trap combos in Phase 2. This one that he will follow up with an instant dagger swipe when you move back into punish is just so unnecessarily mean for the first major boss. You can't really stay mad though because Margit is hard for a reason, and nowadays it's awesome to have such a complex and rewarding fight so early in the game. So many of Margit's strengths can be used against him. His infamous delays are really just easy openings to strafe and charge a heavy attack. Successfully evading his more complex combos will always lead to good openings, and if you're quick enough to chase him down when he backs off, you can get a quick jump attack in before his next attack. Both Godric and Margit were significantly more enjoyable on New Game Plus where they actually pose a challenge, but for this ranking they end up forgotten compared to the big challenges later on. There's going to be a bit of a trend for the next few entries. First up is the Draconic Tree Sentinel, and man, this guy is a real issue at level 1. He's one of the first bosses that will one-shot you with every attack, and you have to get through him to get some useful items like the Ritual Shield Talisman. Even on normal playthroughs, he usually messes me up a few times. I think what makes him so tough is that even though 90% of his moveset is slams and swipes with his hammer, the timing of them varies so wildly. He has super slow delayed moves, others that come out surprisingly fast, and everything in between, so you really need to stay calm and just react to each actual swing. Getting behind him can help because it will often end his combo early, and you can get in some big damage before he reacts. Since he staggers easily, some smart positioning and heavy attacks can lead to a lot of stance breaks and help you have more control over the pace of the fight. Thankfully, the added lightning damage when he buffs doesn't really matter since you get one shot regardless. I think this is my least favorite Tree Sentinel variant. The quality difference isn't big, but the others have a bit better attack variety and flow. They're one of the few field bosses that I still seek out every playthrough. Commander Gaius. Man, people really still hate this boss. I mean, I get hating the charge, though it is still rollable, and also you can just ride away from the boss on torrent to avoid the opener. But beyond the charge, I don't get what there is to dislike here. All of his other moves are so manageable, maybe even a little too manageable since he only has 2 or 3 basic melee combos. I think he makes up for it though with the higher focus on his mount and his big gravity attacks. I love the long combo with both his weapon and the boar. It's so satisfying to dodge one of them and then watch the other sail over your head. Getting behind them is also advantageous here because you can get in a light attack, bait out the kick, and then get a heavier punish. Unfortunately, Phase 2 doesn't add much. A bunch of the DLC bosses are like this where they'll get 3 or 4 impressive looking attacks, but their core moveset remains completely unchanged. Maybe they were trying to avoid some of the backlash that a lot of the base game bosses got for being so complex with wildly different second phases, though I don't think it worked given the unprecedented level of rage this DLC generated. In any case, I think it makes for some fights that are less memorable in the long term, though still fun and worth the trip to face on each playthrough. The exception to that might be Putrescent Knight though. I enjoy this boss, but wow does it take a long time to get to. Down the hill by Insis, through the ravine, and all the way across the Cerulean coast just to get to the fissure. People often complain about having to ride torrent around too much in Elden Ring, but this is one of the only times where it really gets to me. Putrescent Knight was actually my least favorite of the DLC remembrances on my first playthrough. I found his moveset a bit too simple and the constant riding away annoying. It didn't help that this was the 4th remembrance I found after Dancing Lion, Rilana, and Mesmer, and at that point I thought all the DLC bosses were going to be as crazy as those 3. Over time though, I've come around to the fight more and more. If you know how the boss's attacks carry him, you can preemptively start chasing him down and get in an attack as he skids to face you again. There's also the high amount of jumpable attacks. The fire moves obviously, but you can jump over this low swipe too, which creates a damage opportunity out of an attack that carries him a long way from you afterwards. This boss just suffers from the same basic Phase 2 problem that I mentioned with Gaius, plus sometimes he can still ride around in a circle for an annoyingly long time. The generally cooler design and some especially fun attacks are what give this one the edge. I'm finally rounding out the mounted bosses with Loretta. Loretta takes the Tree Sentinel fight and infuses it with some special magic sauce. The melee moveset is great, but what really makes it so fun is the risk-reward that comes from her sorceries. If you know what you're doing, you can be so aggressive against this boss. She loves to jump back and make space for a spell, but you can always chase her down for an attack before she has a chance to continue into her next move. I think Glintblade Phalanx works better in this fight than any other. The delay before they fire is perfectly tuned for you to get a good attack in if you're brave enough, and then avoid her next combo and the glint blades at the same time. This gives the fight a really nice flow as you both trade off between offense and defense. My only complaint is that sometimes she just can't handle your aggression and gets looped into trying to jump away a bunch of times in a row. If that happens, you can pretty much just keep attacking her, chain stance breaks, and end the fight a little too fast. People might think I'm crazy for ranking Fortisax this high. I feel like at some point everyone just decided this boss is bad. I guess I get why. It's pretty chaotic and messy, and it plays with some things that frustrate people, like having to play unlocked and manage arena hazards. I was expecting the fight to be way more painful than it ended up being. I've always enjoyed it in normal runs, but there's just a lot going on, and attacks can overlap in difficult ways sometimes. The best place to be during any Ancient Dragon fight is under the boss, since their frontal offense is ridiculously oppressive, and they don't have many threatening options for hitting you down there. I don't really enjoy the normal Ancient Dragons because their huge health pools encourage you to camp under them for the entire fight, and that just isn't very fun. Fortisax counters this with his sticky lightning strikes, something that is not very dangerous on its own, even at level 1, but can easily stun you and set you up to get hit by another attack. I think this is what annoys people most about the fight, but I have to go against the grain and say I actually like this mechanic. The lightning will never hit you if you are moving, so all you need to do is not be in an attack animation when it goes off. You still have plenty of time for an attack or two after the glow appears, as long as you keep track of it. Frustrating mechanics like this are often designed to make you panic and aren't actually that bad if you stay calm. So the Fortisax fight has kind of a unique flow to it where you dive under the boss, get as many hits in as you can before the lightning gets too overwhelming, back off to recollect yourself, and repeat. Plus, every so often you'll have to deal with some insanely cool lightning move which adds some spectacle and variety. And I can't really ignore the visuals here. The boss looks so unbelievably cool with the red lightning constantly crackling around its body. I think I just get enough enjoyment out of Fortisax that there being the occasional twinge of BS doesn't really bother me. It's just a boss you need to approach differently, and bosses like that can be hit or miss depending on your tastes. We're starting to get into the really good fights now, but even so I feel kind of bad ranking Radahn this low. This was the first truly hard boss I fought, just after going through Stormveil and Raya Lucaria, and I wonder if I might enjoy it more now after getting used to the fragility of level 1. Because Radahn is obviously an incredible boss, a truly epic and unique battle that somehow has more melee variety and more gravity magic than his prime counterpart. But man, I died a lot here, and I think it was a bit less fun compared to normal runs. Radahn has a few moves that I have always struggled with, and they punished me hard here. These two double swipes really messed me up. The first one you need to quickly get away from, and the second requires you to dodge to his side, so that you don't get clipped by the follow-up as he scoots around behind you. There's also this one really fast slam that got me a lot, though eventually I learned that he mostly uses it as a follow-up to his backstep and the big 4-part combo. As long as I didn't overcommit after those, I could always dodge it. But having a few moves that keep getting you can drop the enjoyment of a boss even when you know what you should be doing. We're starting to get to the point on the list where complaints are less about actual flaws and more about things I'm bad at, making some fights more frustrating than others. I think the way you're encouraged to fight Radahn was also detrimental. During normal runs I fight him with a little distance, so that I can see his whole model and react to his windups better. But at level 1 there's just no denying how safe it is to jam yourself into his legs and pile on the damage while his attacks go over your head. This is certainly effective, but much less fun, and it makes the whole thing feel a bit messy and awkward. If I did another run, I would probably try to avoid this, and I think it would push Radahn higher up the list. Okay, let me show you how to kill Nile's Knights, because this seems like a real sore spot for a lot of people. I've been doing this since launch, and it works 100% of the time most of the time. Immediately run up to the dual sword one and hit him with a strong attack. Preferably something without super long recovery though, because you need to then immediately run away. You want to trigger the knight to do his spinny blender move, since this is super easy to dodge with some range and is a free backstab opportunity. Then hit him with another strong attack as he stands up, and he'll be basically dead unless your damage is really low. After that, it's an easy 1v1 with an enemy you've been fighting since the beginning of the game, as Nile just hangs out in the background. Since that's done, I can talk about how fun Nile is. This is another boss that allows you to play extremely aggressively. His normal combos are laughably slow, so you can hit him non-stop during and after his swings. Despite this, he is no pushover, since in between combos he will mix in surprisingly fast AoEs with his lightning foot that will hit you without a well-timed dodge. You're not going to outrange these. Niall is also a bit of a troll. His big dramatic attacks are almost never followed by safe openings, as he'll swipe you with his weapon afterwards, or summon a frost AoE that lingers too long to be iframed. You need to first avoid these follow-ups and then go in for damage. This all just makes for a really nicely balanced back and forth. I love bosses like this that let you be constantly aggressive while still maintaining a solid threat level throughout. Rykard gets a lot more dangerous at level 1. Well, assuming you don't just stunlock him with the Serpent Hunter's weapon skill. I never do that though, since I like actually playing the game. Like I talked about with Estelle, this is a fight you can usually tank a lot of attacks and heal through in normal runs, and removing that option makes you have to acclimate to his moveset a lot more. Rykard doesn't have the highest attack variety, but what he does have is a lot of tough timings and moves you have to react to faster than you expect. I always heard that his ground quake move was unavoidable, but I was able to avoid it quite consistently by just running to the side and jumping as soon as I saw the animation start. I also saw some attacks in Phase 1 that I don't think I had ever seen in 3 years of playing this game. You can see me just cluelessly running away. Phase 2 elevates the fight a lot. In addition to just generally more enjoyable attacks, there are ones you can jump heavy over, and others you can strafe out of the way of for a big punish window. The addition of the snake attacks towards the end also really mixes things up. They come out a lot faster than his sword swings, so you need to untrain your muscle memory and always be ready for something fast or slow. If you capitalize on every opening, you can consistently kill him before the skull phase, which is nice since base stamina makes avoiding all that a little scarier. I also kept losing my bubble tier from touching my toes on the lava, so my margin for error was even lower. Executing all this without taking a hit just feels so cool with the near unparalleled visuals and animations of the fight. I was one of the people who spent 6 years defending Yorm for being a fun spectacle, but ever since this dropped he just seems so pitiful. Like, the jumping quality and effort level between these two bosses is staggering. Midra has gotten a lot of praise since the launch of the DLC for being an Elden Ring boss that doesn't take hours of practice to understand. While I love the complexity of Elden Ring's hardest fights, I get where people are coming from. Like I said in the Godric block, I really wish there were more awesome, simpler bosses in the base game, and I think Midra would fit really well somewhere around Altus Plateau. On my first playthrough I was a bit disappointed by him though. Midra is the most hidden boss in the DLC, has really highly scaled health and damage, and is locked behind Jory, source of my nightmares. But his moveset always feels like it's one step away from true greatness. With how early he transitions into Phase 2, I was kind of expecting a third phase to kick up the combo variety and difficulty, like how Radagon and Lady Maria work. Over time though, I've adjusted my expectations and I get a lot more out of the fight. Part of that is the absolutely incredible presentation and music, but there's a lot to love in the moveset too. I think once Phase 2 starts, there's just enough combos and mix-ups to keep the melee moveset interesting compared to someone like Consort Radahn. Some of his new moves are just super fun too, like this 5-hit Frenzy Wave combo. But what really makes the fight work is the large variety of Frenzy projectile attacks he can throw out between and even in the middle of combos. These moves are fast and way more scary than his normal sword swings, since they require tight rolls in specific directions. They add a bit of panic to the fight, and they're over fast enough to not break up the flow. Midra has a ton of HP, but his long openings and pathetic stance mean you can really beat him up and crit him over and over. I get that he's a half-rotted corpse at this point, but you'd think the power of an outer god could give him stronger ankles. I don't think this fight really gets any more or less fun at level 1, since he isn't annoying or very complex, but that's fine since he's always just a great boss. Man, I was so worried for this boss. I really thought it would be a nightmare, given the length and how much of a bastard the Elden Beast can be. I'll start with Radagon though. Back when the game first launched and people were complaining about boss design, this was one of the few fights that they still seem to generally like. I've always found this kind of insane because Radagon might be the most Elden Ring boss. He has super fast reaction checks, comically long delays, crazy combo variation, AoEs on half his attacks, He can teleport out of your punishes, and man, if you let him live too long in Phase 3, he can just go sicko mode. I've had him get into insane, unstoppable chains of flying around, flinging projectiles at me. None of this is bad, but I think of every boss in the entire game, Radagon took me the longest to master. I love the way this fight handles phases. The ramp up in difficulty feels so smooth and natural as new attacks and patterns get added and old attacks get augmented. It starts fairly manageable but gets overwhelming and crazy by the end without you ever noticing when things changed. The Radagon part of the fight is unfortunately a bit brief though, only taking up around 1/3 of the battle for me most of the time. This is probably the part where you expect me to complain that Elden Beast drags the quality of this final boss down, but I just can't. I really have nothing against the Elden Beast. Is this partly because I think this might be FromSoft's best presented boss ever? Maybe. But outside of Elden Stars and some long attacks dragging the fight out, I think it has a pretty fun moveset. I was so worried for Elden Stars though, like I really thought this might be run killer material. Oh. You can just stagger him out of it. Since he always uses it at half HP, this is honestly not hard to do at all. Without that to worry about, the biggest menace is probably these sky beams. I just cannot consistently avoid getting chipped here, but thankfully taking a hit from one won't kill you at level 1. Other than that, this is mostly a pretty chill fight. The Elden Beast is very slow, and while it might swim away a lot, when it does use its close range attacks, you can get lots and lots of damage in. It also stays stunned for a super long time for extra damage when you stance break it. RNG definitely plays a role here, but I don't think it's anywhere near as bad or inconsistent as Fire Giant. In my experience, you'll usually get a decent mix of easy and hard attacks, with 1 or 2 times he decides to just swim around being annoying. If I could change one thing other than Elden Stars, it would probably be the jumpable ring move. It is a really fun and unique attack, but it takes forever, and I don't think having 2 versions that the boss always uses adds anything. I'd probably just cut the single one and leave the triple one in as a kind of low HP ultimate move. So while I do definitely prefer Radagon, I think these 2 fights complement each other more than most people give them credit for. We are up to the best of the best now, the S tier of Elden Ring. The next 6 or so spots are a bit nebulous. They're all really close in quality, so don't take the actual ranking too seriously. Godfrey is one of my favorite bosses of all time. I think his first phase might have the best flow of any boss FromSoft has made. In many ways, this is the fight that is most similar to Consort Radahn, as they're both big, beefy strength chads that rely almost entirely on heavy close-range melee combos. Godfrey can mix up his combos in way more varied ways than Radahn, but I think the real difference maker is something else. Godfrey will constantly reposition himself with a dash away, and then re-engage you with a stomp that you can jump attack over. He can also rip up the ground with his axe, and while you can iframe this, it encourages you to back off and lets him use one of his gap-closing attacks afterwards. These little bits of added motion go such a long way towards making the fight feel less static and letting him use his full kit. I have to say though, I think Light Roll was trolling me here. Godfrey has a pretty narrow cone that you need to be in for him to continue his combo, and the longer roll distance kept putting me too far to the side. This messed me up way more than you might think. If this happens, his recovery can be quite fast, and you really want him to finish his combos as they end with big damage windows. And man, there's just something about this fight. It's weighty in a way no other FromSoft boss is. There's a slight screen shake on every stomp and slam he does, and while I think this applies to a lot of bosses, with Godfrey it is so constant and so loud. It's just infectious. I can get locked into this phase to the point where my brain turns off and my fingers do it for me. I definitely cannot say this about Phase 2 though. 3 years later and Hoarah still scares me. I can deal with it fine on normal runs, but with the fragility of level 1, the cowardice took over. I mastered his big slams and grabs long ago, but his combos are another story. They're so flexible with so many different timings that I never feel remotely in control when he starts one. Panic is a recipe for disaster at level 1, and I would be lying if I didn't admit my skill issue here lowered the enjoyment a bit. I think what actually keeps Godfrey a bit low in the top 10 though is just how little time you need to spend actually fighting him. This was one of the shortest major bosses of the entire run, and some of that time was spent on his 2 super long buff moves that let you freely attack him. The second half of Phase 1 was only 5 attacks long, which is a shame because that's the most fun part. A lot of the DLC bosses ended up kind of low on this list, but now we have 8 left and half of them are from the DLC. It's fitting, I think, because these were the only 4 that felt like they pushed the design philosophy of the base game fights forward to me. The Dancing Lion is very hard. The DLC fights in general were tough because I have so much less experience with them, but a few of them have some extra nastiness. Obviously, you can just come here at Skydo Tree 20 and demolish him, but I wanted to beat every boss at what felt like an appropriate blessing level. It took me a few playthroughs to be able to discern which of the lion's windups lead to which attacks. A lot of his bite combos look similar, and it consistently surprises me with mix-ups that I didn't know existed. This really quick bite combo is particularly rough, and something you always need to keep in mind when you are close to the boss in neutral. Overcommitting to big punishes is not an option because of this one attack. Since he'll only use it at point blank though, you can still often get a jump attack in from range as he starts his next move. The real secret to this fight though is to dodge almost everything backwards. This might seem counterintuitive, but getting to his sides can mess with the camera, and you really want his mouth in full view at all times so you can react as fast as possible. This holds true for Phase 2 as well. Backwards dodges will put you out of range of the big ice and wind hitboxes. The lightning phase is definitely the most demanding, but there are patterns to it. Some of the attacks like the big slam and tail whip are timed to the lightning strikes, and others let you get an attack in if you position just right. This boss can be a real nightmare if you aren't playing it right, so I get why many bounced off of it. But when things go well, it feels incredible. On my winning run, I managed to get through all 3 elemental phases flawlessly, nailing each of their special moves. The animations and music here are some next level stuff. It's crazy to me that FromSoft can think of boss ideas this out there and still give so much character and polish to their presentation. Rulana is the most mechanically demanding boss in the game. I was keeping off the internet to avoid spoilers when the DLC launched, but when I got to Rulana I was like, oh no. I could just imagine the infinite combo no openings rage posts. And this might be the only boss where I can kind of relate to that. She has an absolutely insane amount of combo variations, and depending on what she picks, they can go on for a long time. Especially with that long 4-hit combo finisher in Phase 2. But I think what alleviates this issue for me is how complex dodging her assaults is. This is not a boss where you can just iframe things. Her combos are full of constant double hits that will shred you if you're in their range. The amount of directional rolling you have to do is crazy. It is so strict compared to any other boss, and in Phase 2, one roll in the wrong direction can end your run even with a normal amount of health. This all means that even when you're just dodging some 15-hit combo, the fight never stops being engaging. And it isn't usually like that. Once you start to see the patterns behind the blender of sword swings, there are a lot of openings and plenty of chances for stance breaks. Similar to Loretta, you can chase her down as she casts Glintblade Phalanx for a jump attack, but here it is much more difficult to dodge everything afterwards, and it feels great when you succeed. There is one thing that drops the fight for me a little though, and that's the super fast uppercut combo starter. I've talked a bit about reaction checks in some of the DLC bosses, but this one is particularly bothersome. Unlike with the Lion, you are constantly close to Rulana when she finishes her combos, and she will use it a lot. It's definitely reactable, but you need to have your eyes locked on her left hand every time you attack her. It just feels like it dictates the fight a little too much. On the other hand, her special moves are some of the most fun in the game to avoid. Carrion Sovereignty is satisfying, the 5 magic waves are super fun to sprint and jump over, and the triple moon attack was an instant all-timer. And I was sort of wrong about the rage posts. They were definitely there in the first few days, but the community swung positive impressively fast. I think it's because, despite her difficulty, it's always very clear what you did wrong, and eventually it just starts to make sense. Morgott was my favorite boss in the game after my first playthrough, and he's the reason I always go to Lane Dell early or keep a low upgrade weapon on me. There's a reason why any challenge run video will talk about how much more level 1 made them appreciate this boss, because as soon as you start actually learning his moveset and patterns, it's kind of mind-blowing how it all comes together. Morgott may seem like he can chain together whatever the hell he wants, but his follow-up options at any given time are actually fairly strict. The thing is though, the entire moveset is designed to counter your soul's muscle memory. Many of his slow, heavy attacks that look like finishers are tricks that lead into quick follow-ups, and many of his really fast moves are the actual openings, since they lead into long, delayed swings. What this means is that once you've internalized these branches, you start to see a constant stream of mid-combo openings. For example, anytime you roll with this running swipe, you can always get in an attack after, as his only follow-up options are a hop to the left or a super slow horizontal swipe. This diagonal swing can always be punished, as it leads to the slow vertical cut. And anytime he does his sword and hammer swing, you can get in an attack before and after. So much in this fight feels timed perfectly for mid-combo attacks. Even with slow weapons, a rolling R1 will be quick enough for you to dodge the next swing right as your recovery ends. If you get this down, you can dance with Morgott as he zooms around the arena, constantly chipping at his health with big and small punishes. It's just so smooth, and I think it took them until one DLC boss that I haven't talked about yet to surpass this level of kinetic energy. At level 1, Morgott is much more dangerous, but also surprisingly lenient. Since he doesn't have Mountaintops level scaling, and you can get the Ritual Shield Talisman right before him, you can survive quite a few of his hits. You don't have to get some of his quicker mix-ups 100% down. Honestly though, I've put so much time into learning this moveset that even at level 1 it feels comfy to me. I'm sure everyone has those bosses that are like slipping into a pair of old shoes, and this is one of mine. Malekith, the bane of FromSoft video essayists. I still see people say that this boss has no openings, and I'm just wishing he had more health so that he wouldn't die so fast in Phase 2. But I was one of those people in my first playthrough. This fight absolutely destroyed me. I could just not understand it. As soon as I got to Phase 2, my screen may as well have transitioned into the "you died" screen, and I ended up beating him feeling like I still didn't know how to deal with some attacks. On my second playthrough, figuring out Malekith was one of the things I was most determined to do, and by the end of that fight he was my new favorite boss. He was probably the first boss that I really mastered. I think everything Malekith does outside of his retreating flip can be punished, provided you know how to get close to him during the attack. Both phases of this fight are really just positioning tests. For the Beast Clergyman, you want to stay at a slight range in front of him, dodging his combos so that he will finish with the ultra punishable downward slam. Punish all his rock throws by dodging into him, the Beast Claw by jumping over it, and the long dagger scrape by running to his back. I was so turned off by this phase at first because you need to play in a very specific way for it to not be frustrating. But once you get it, it's a really fun and unique loop. Phase 2 is most people's problem though. The test here is to adjust your rolls to make sure you are already close to him when he finishes his attacks. If you're rolling away from his swings and AoEs, you're not going to have enough time to run back in and hit him. And if you run too far away, he'll immediately respond with a devastating chasing move. Because while most of Elden Ring's bosses react to your positioning, Malekith's responses are particularly strict and predictable. When he does a horizontal swing or sits on his sword, where you're standing will always trigger one of two specific responses. Once you understand stuff like this, it not only makes the fight easier, but lets you intentionally draw out moves you want. This makes it so that you're both sharing control of the fight, and since his attacks require such a wide variety of responses from you, it always feels so intense and exciting. This boss was not very different from a normal run for me. Like Morgott, I just have his moveset seared into my muscle memory, and Malekith does such insane damage that even on normal runs the error margin is pretty low. I was worried that Rune level 1 would make me like Bale less. If you don't know, Bale has a bugged fire breath attack that bounces around in weird ways like that fire giant attack from earlier. And even beyond that, this fight is just a lot. The masses of delayed AoEs, the tough to predict roar move, the camera getting smushed up into walls. I've had so many Bale attempts in the past where I just felt like I was barely clinging on, and struggling to get any real damage on his massive health bar. So I was actually stunned at how painless this was. It took a while but wasn't nearly as long or frustrating as I expected. Everything started to click for me. It took 7 years, but FromSoft finally made a successful iteration on Midir. I really like that fight, but once you know each attack, it becomes almost mindlessly simple because they never vary or transition into other attacks. Bale Elden Rings that formula by giving him way more unpredictable and difficult attacks, way smaller damage windows, extreme mobility, and punishes for you overcommitting. He feels like such an insurmountable wall at first. While Midir and most other dragons move like lumbering heavy animals, Bale's attacks are snappy and aggressive, like they somehow made his animations feel angry. This fight actually made me like Placidusax more, because his calm collectedness contrasts so well with Bale's feral rage. I haven't talked that much about Boss's aura, but it's just so inseparable from the quality of this fight. FromSoft has been pushing the spectacle of their bosses for a long time, and this is another new level. This isn't to downplay the mechanics though, because they're equally good. For a non-humanoid boss, he is really complex, both in how he varies his patterns and in the attacks themselves. Once Phase 2 starts, there are so many explosions everywhere that even if you avoid the attack, they can block you from being able to access his head. Like Malekith, this is a boss where you need to earn good openings by understanding how the boss moves. If you unlock and roll to the right for these slow slams, you'll be out of range for the follow-up lightning and free to get a quick hit on his head. Many attacks make him highly likely to use this quick 2-hit combo afterwards, which means you can get a light attack in before and then a big one after. And his countless insane spectacle attacks all leave him open for damage afterwards, which is something that isn't always the case with Elden Ring bosses. I always thought this fight lasted forever, but I think it was just because I used to get hit so much. My winning attempt was less than 3.5 minutes, a full minute shorter than Placidusax. This might sound insane, but I think level 1 feels like the right way to face Bale. Like, look at what you're fighting. Every single attack should instantly kill you, and finally being able to weave through everything and slay this impossibly strong dragon was one of the best moments of my playthrough. Messmer is not the number 1 boss on this list, and he's not my number 1 FromSoft boss, but I have no doubt in my mind that he is the best boss they've ever made. Everything is firing on all cylinders here. The complexity and flow of the moveset is top tier. The visuals and spectacle left me legitimately awestruck the first time I saw Phase 2. And the story and writing perfectly introduces and ends the true story of this character that's been looming over you for the whole DLC. They really fit an entire character arc into one battle. After so much polarization regarding Elden Ring's bosses, it was great to watch almost the entire community unite behind loving this fight. I've talked a bit in this video about how important flow and energy is to me, and this is the boss that does it best. Messmer flings himself around in such grand sweeping motions, covering the arena in fire and snakes, but it never feels frustrating because the flow of the fight brings you right along with him. Anytime he's aggressive, he will close the distance to you, and when he tries to make distance, it's never far away enough that you can't still roll along with him and punish. And Phase 2 just kicks all of this up even further. I really couldn't believe that they made these snake attacks work with the camera and small arena. Not only do they look and feel incredible to dodge, but they can seamlessly flow into its Phase 1 attacks. In this phase, he also replaces the recovery on his normal combos with this backstep into a lunging corkscrew, but you can still get in attacks before and after if you move with him. This means that they essentially eliminated downtime in the fight without actually reducing damage windows. The constant motion, constant back and forth of attacking and dodging, it's just something that only exists in Elden Ring where stamina costs are so low, and the delayed attacks let you regenerate it mid-combo. So why is Messmer only at 3? Well, he does have one attack I don't really like. This slow spear thrust with the weird lingering hitbox. Dodging this requires way tighter than normal dodge timing, and even though you get used to it, it just feels so inconsistent with how every other thrust attack in the game works. In Dark Souls 1, most thrusts do this, and I think we left that in 2011 for a reason. But I think I'm also just less practiced at the DLC bosses, and I kept dying in stupid ways and getting annoyed. So I guess this is what happens when you base a ranking on one specific run. I definitely do not like Mohg as much as Messmer, but he's still a top tier fight. Part of the reason he lands all the way at number 2 is because I absolutely demolished him on my 3rd try, and it felt amazing. He's like the perfect mix of an intense and varied moveset with a ton of openings. Most of his swings are slow with quick gaps mid-combo for light attacks, and long recovery when his combos end. I talked about how Loretta just cannot withstand hyper-aggression, but Mohg is able to still be very dangerous while allowing you to play this way. This is partly because of the more challenging moveset, and partly because he regains around a quarter of his health going into Phase 2. I always fight Mohg without the Crystal Tear these days. I feel like he's a little easier than most of the other endgame bosses, and the increased HP and reduced healing puts him more in line. It also adds a bit of extra challenge to Phase 1, as you try to see how much damage you can do during his countdown and transition. Even if you take out most of his health, he'll still regain enough to make Phase 2 feel like a satisfying length. And you want that because this phase is another where everything is working perfectly. This flying dive that can lead into so many different follow-ups is one of my favorite attacks in the game. It mixes into his moveset perfectly and keeps you on your toes because you can never fully predict what he'll use after. I don't think Moog even has that many individual moves, but with how they combine and how the Blood Flame limits your movement options, the fight never feels stale or repetitive. I absolutely love the Blood Flame mechanic here. It adds such an interesting risk-reward dynamic to the fight, and since standing on it does so little damage, and bleed is percentage based, even at level 1 it's pretty lenient. Most of it can be avoided by sticking close to Moog, but if he's standing in it you can choose to sacrifice some health to keep up the pressure. It adds this extra level of resource management provided you can keep a level head. This all comes together to make a fight that is endlessly satisfying. The slower paced fights like this really shine at level 1. Fast bosses like R'Lana are more intense, but when you die in one hit, it's nice to have the pressure taken off your reaction time and placed solely on your knowledge of the moveset and mechanics. I'm just gonna start with Waterfowl, because for me it's the least interesting part of the fight and I want to get it out of the way. I think if you want to enjoy Malenia, you need to get to the point where you don't even think about Waterfowl. The fight is built around playing offensively, knocking her out of her attacks, and using her low poise to get multiple hits per opening. If you play passively, keeping distance and minimizing your attacks, the flow of the fight is utterly ruined. There are lots of ways to deal with Waterfowl. Personally, I've never felt the need to learn the close range dodge. I just swap to a shield and block the first flurry. It works great even with base stamina, and the health she regains is pretty minimal. My number one piece of advice for Malenia is to not let this one attack ruin the fight for you. I understand the sentiment that everything should be intuitively dodgeable, but the most important thing in these games is to enjoy yourself, and the second I broke this mindset and started just blocking Waterfowl, she became my favorite boss in the game. Because if you can truly get into the flow of this fight, there's really nothing like it. FromSoft has been iterating on the fast, low-poise female warrior boss for 3 games, and they've now had 2 attempts to solve the stunlock issue that Lady Maria had. Freed's solution was just to be able to dodge away from you, which worked, but could be a little annoying. Malenia will instead break out of stunlock by instantly activating certain attacks with hyper armor. Since she's responding with offense instead of defense, this keeps the pace much faster at the cost of being much more difficult to learn. At all times during this fight, you need to be thinking several steps ahead, not just about getting an opening, but about what her likely responses to your next attack will be, and how you will deal with that. This is easily the most flexible and responsive boss that From has ever made. She doesn't have that many individual moves, but she can string basically anything together in an infinite number of ways. She can probably combo forever if you let her, but with enough knowledge you can stagger her with an attack or use smart positioning to trigger a finisher. The more aggressive you play, the more you'll make her attack you, so the pace of the fight rises the better you are at it. Phase 2 shows just how much altering patterns and responses can affect a fight. There are barely any new attacks in this phase, but hitting her more than once is no longer safe because she's likely to respond with her kick. To make up for it, you can get big attacks in after this kick, or during the long recovery of her rot AoEs. It took me so many playthroughs to get a handle on all the little quirks in this moveset, but the more you learn, the more the design of the fight makes sense. Like how you can always stun her out of this dash to the left, or how her kick has different possible follow-ups depending on whether she uses it in a combo or as a response to your attacks. FromSoft just never really makes fights like this. The vast majority of their bosses have infinite poise, and you have to play their game for openings. And don't get me wrong, they're the masters of this kind of fight, but with Malenia, the pace and flow of the fight depends on your attacks and your positioning just as much as her moveset. And to me that gives her this extra bit of longevity and skill ceiling beyond any other boss. This took me around as long as Consort Radahn, but the difference in enjoyment could not have been more stark. Beating Malenia at level 1 felt like the ultimate test of skill, and while a lot of this list was really hard to order, I never had any doubt that she would be number 1. And that's my list. Elden Ring's bosses have been a contentious subject since launch. Definitely less now though, which is nice. Obviously you're free to like or dislike whatever you want. There are certainly aspects of the design in this game that are meant to trick and mess with you, and that won't be for everyone. Elden Ring's bosses aren't here to give you nice big openings, or to conveniently time their swings to the cadence of your dodge roll, or to stand there looking at you while you heal all their progress away. They're here to kill you, and they'll use whatever they have at their disposal to achieve this. But that's part of the magic here for me. They can seem so impenetrable at first, like they have no rules or weaknesses, but it's a facade. Behind the onslaught of attacks, these bosses are, for the most part, every bit as fair and learnable as those in all the other FromSoft games. And the fact that they achieve this while upping the moveset complexity by so much, and also mixing in an unprecedented amount of spectacle, story, and character, is such a testament to the skill of their designers. If you've ever had the urge to do a level 1 run, I say go for it. It was honestly so much more fun and less frustrating than I expected. I think anyone who has at least a decent understanding of how all the bosses work can get through this, and probably come out the other side with more appreciation for them. And if anyone actually made it this far in the video, wow, thank you. This took an insanely long time to make, considering I have no idea if it will get even a single view. But sometimes you just get the itch to make something. So yeah, that's all. Bye.